Things have moved quickly, dramatically, and furiously in the last 24 hours when it comes to India's responses and how the US-Israel-Iran war is now impacting India's economic and security interests. Prime Minister Modi has made his first statement on the West Asia war, saying that military conflicts do not lead to any solutions. His comments come on a day when Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri has offered condolences at Iran's embassy in the national capital over the killing of Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. All of this must be seen against the backdrop of a dramatic and shocking event in our own neighborhood, in our own backyard. A US submarine sinking an Iranian warship that was heading back after being a guest of India as part of naval exercises a fortnight ago. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, Prime Minister Modi has made his first big remark on the West Asia war, saying that military conflicts do not lead to any solutions, whether it's in Russia, Ukraine, or in West Asia. His comments come on a day when Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri was in fact at the Iranian embassy in the national capital, and he officially offered condolences over the killing of Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. Khamenei was taken out in US strikes that started this entire phase of what's being called the Israel-Iran war, really a misnomer. It's almost like an America-Iran war more than it's anything else, and it's fast pulled in other countries of the world. Now the war has reached, metaphorically and literally, India's own backyard. This has happened when over the weekend, America released this dramatic footage showing how a torpedo sank an Iranian warship, the IRIS Dena, as it was heading back home. Now, here's where things get really, what should I say, ironic. This ship was a guest of India a fortnight ago. Its soldiers were actually marching as part of a parade in Visakhapatnam. The parade was reviewed by President Murmu. They were here as part of a fleet review exercise, which takes place annually. And the ship was near Sri Lanka. It was not in Indian waters. It was not even in Lankan waters, but it was within what's called the EEZ of Sri Lanka when it was sunk by a US torpedo. And this has led to a fierce debate here at home as to whether the Americans have crossed a red line or whether this is fair game in a ruthless war, and the Iranians, some are arguing, might have done the same. It's a very, very passionate debate, and the comments made by the Prime Minister as well as Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri's public appearance at the Iranian embassy in Delhi today, these are all dots that connect in some ways. To look at all that has happened as the war reaches our doorsteps, there are all kinds of economic and security implications for us as well. I want to introduce three very distinguished experts. I want to welcome military veteran Admiral Shekhar Sinha on the program. Thank you, sir. Lots of questions for the Navy here, and who better to answer them than you. Thank you. Veteran journalist Padma Rao is with us. Thank you, Padma. And also joining us is Ambassador Yash Sinha. Vast amounts of experience in this region, has led the Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan desk in the MEA, has met with Khamenei twice, has been to Iran several times. So thank you. We're counting on that experience to make sense of all that's happened. Prime Minister Modi's statement on the West Asia war was made as part of a joint briefing with the leadership of Finland. So it was made in a sort of general context, but the import of it escapes no one. Let's take a look.
Friend, भारत और फिनलैंड दोनों रूल ऑफ लॉ, डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी में विश्वास रखते हैं। हम एकमत है कि केवल मिलिट्री कॉन्फ्लिक्ट से किसी भी मुद्दे का समाधान नहीं निकल सकता। यूक्रेन हो या पश्चिमी एशिया, हम संघर्ष की शीघ्र समाप्ति और शांति के हर प्रयास का समर्थन करते रहेंगे।
We will continue to support all efforts at peace, and we believe that whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or whether it is the West Asia war, military conflict do not lead to any solution. This comment by the Prime Minister comes on a day when there was a lot of um, debate around who would go to sign the condolence book. Let's play up those pictures. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri was at the Iranian embassy. He met with the ambassador. He offered condolences on behalf of India over the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. This is significant because this is the first offer of condolences over the killing of Khamenei. India's previous official statements have only expressed concern, anxiety, called for peace, called for de-escalation. They have not specifically condemned the US action, and they have not specifically offered condolences. So this is the first time we're seeing official condolences being offered. And then, of course, the third most important thing that's taken place today is that, well, not today, has taken place yesterday, but we're looking at its implications today, is the downing of the sinking of the Iranian warship. This, even as Sri Lankan MPs are confirming that there's a second Iranian ship that could be in the region, and we have to see what happens to it. So let me start. Let me try and break this up into what happened with the Navy and the Prime Minister's statement. So I'll start with the Prime Minister's statement with you, Ambassador Sinha. It's come several days into the conflict. I think its import is lost on no one. Given what happened with the ship, there's a sense, I think, of discomfort. I know it's generated a lot of debate. There's one view that says we couldn't have done anything. The ship wasn't in Indian waters, even if the ship was a guest of India. There's another view that says a red line has been crossed. We're uncomfortable with America's unilateralism. We need to say something. Do you think this is the Prime Minister's way of saying that something? The images you see of your screen are the sailors who marched in Visakhapatnam 2 weeks ago. Most of these sailors are now at the bottom of the ocean.
Barkha, thank you for having me on your show. I think it's extremely unfortunate what happened to IRIS Dena. Irrespective of where it happened, the fact that in the fog of war, such losses do take place. But however, this is far removed from the scene of action. And I think that has, you rightly put it, caused a lot of disquiet in India. Not that India could have prevented it from happening, because as you correctly said, it was outside Indian waters, both territorial waters and the exclusive economic zone. But I think the fact that an American ship came here, a submarine came here and did that, in my opinion, unnecessarily expands the theater of war. And I think the discomfort also comes from the fact that this is a very crucial sort of pipeline to our energy security. We have almost 10 million Indians living there. So I think the Prime Minister was restrained, as always, restrained and measured. But it's quite clear what he was saying, because, I'm not sure whether the Americans had any idea what they're getting into. I mean, I'm sure they realize it won't be a picnic like Venezuela, but what is happening now in Iran is large-scale destruction, and Iran is hitting back. Unfortunately, Iran is hitting back indiscriminately, hitting civilian targets in the neighborhood. And that's where it's a matter of concern for us, because there's such a large Indian diaspora in the Gulf. So I think the Prime Minister is basically voicing the concern of all Indians about what is taking place in the Gulf. And since there is no end game, we don't know what the end game is. At least regime change is not going to happen from bombardments from the sky. I think history tells us that. However, by flattening out one country and then in retaliation, the other country hitting out, it's a recipe for disaster.
A recipe for disaster is perhaps the sharpest and bluntest way to put it. I have questions on the condolences, but we'll come to those in a moment. I want to get in Admiral Sinha's perspective on what happened with the Iranian warship. Admiral, there's a lot of debate taking place in India, and there are two schools of thought. One is that that there's nothing in this for India to do officially. I was interviewing Admiral Arun Prakash earlier, and he said legally there's nothing we could have done, but sentimentally this is like the rule of the jungle. Who are the Americans to come in here? We used to worry about Chinese submarines in our backyard. Now do we have to start thinking about American submarines? So I think everybody's agreed that legally, technically, there's nothing that we could have done or said. But in terms of emotion, there's something a little bit, it drives home a certain kind of American arrogance and unilateralism that I think is making Indians very uncomfortable. I take the point, somebody, a naval officer said to me on background, he said if Iran had the chance, they would have also gone for an American ship in reverse. I take the point that war is ruthless. But from an Indian perspective, to think of an American submarine in the Indian Ocean region acting unilaterally in this way, expanding the theater of war, should it make us uncomfortable? Should it raise our hackles?
Yes, Barkha, thank you very much for getting me on your show. First of all, the expansion of the theater of war, getting it right in our backyard, is of course very much concerning. And that too, when America is a strategic partner militarily. We have Malabar, we have Quad, we have 2+2 agreement. In spite of all this, the least we would have expected from the US Navy was to tell the Indian Navy that we are having an area of operation 100 miles, 200 miles, from the tip of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Not because we don't want to know what they're doing, and certainly even if they told us, we wouldn't have divulged this, because this is the secrecy that we maintain in 2+2. But we would have prevented or told our ships and submarines not to operate in that area, just remain 200 miles away. And secondly, all our trade ships, which are coming from, Gulf of Aden and one coming from eastern side, we would have told the merchant ships to take a detour, come 100 miles away. Imagine if we were operating, the chances of missing a target and some other ship getting a casualty, a torpedo hit, it would have been a big disaster. Then Indian Navy was forced to respond. So this is a very, very it is hurting. You're right that we as strategic partners, you haven't told us. I know in Parakram, I was very much on the scene of action. They were also doing the global war on terror. They were operating at a particular place. We had to operate from those places as well. We had a timing fixed. We used to talk to each other, and they would vacate at a particular time, and we would enter in that area. So this is what is called coordination and the military sort of ethos.
Would it be fair to say that the Americans have not treated the Indians in this case as an equal strategic partner, which is what they want us to be at other times?
No. You see, Barkha, what happens, no? Like Yash said, fog of war. When you are in a moment of sort of accelerating something, you know that there is an Iranian ship, there are 3 of them coming south, and you want to target one. You forget all the niceties. There are no niceties at all. In war, no niceties, no emotions.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed. I only want to understand this from an Indian interest. I agree that this is not our war directly. It is now has consequences for us, but it is not our war. But from an Indian interest, as you said, what disturbs you? Just speaking from an Indian interest.
It disturbs as a naval officer who's been at sea for 30, 40 years. The point is that we have such close friendship, such close equation by regulations, by agreements, and even otherwise, that we expected that they should have told us that we are operating up to 100 miles south of Dondra Head or whatever. That is the normal geographical reference point. But if you don't tell me, my own ships and submarines operate in that area, left, right, and center. You ask Ambassador Yash Sinawad, our High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, is fully aware of this. So we don't want to have a situation where our ships are getting, even merchant ships, we are again duty bound to assist, come to their help. So that is one. What we have done is what Navy has done. A P-8I was in that area flying around. He spotted all this. All these, the information was being given to the Sri Lankans, right? We also sailed a ship. It's called I think it's called Iksha. It's a new survey ship from Cochin. He was in the area. He was also supporting the search force. So these.
So you're saying Indians were assisting the Sri Lankans?
Sorry? Yeah.
You're saying the Indian Navy was assisting the Sri Lankans?
Very much. Very much.
That's important because the Navy hasn't revealed that officially or hasn't said that officially.
See, the P-8I was on a normal patrol. As you know that we are on a mission-based deployment, there are 8 areas, 7 areas where Indian Navy 24/7 is on patrol. Either an aircraft or a ship or a submarine or a satellite, right? So that is how we got this maritime domain awareness. We have a robust maritime domain awareness. Indian Ocean is fully covered, Barkha, at all times. We know who's coming where and who's going. We have to live in a very hostile, region. 2 nuclear parts on your head, and what is happening in the Gulf, you see. So we have to be very careful. These fellows are always on alert. The second point is our warships and submarines are always fully armed, even if it is no war, because you don't know at sea. You don't know. There will be periods of lull, and when it starts, just see what has happened. I mean, this is how a naval war, a maritime war actually starts. So I would say that yes, I would have expected, if I was there, I would have expected that US Navy should have told us, avoid this area, we are doing some exercise. That's all. And not so much
Yeah.
for Iranian, but for our own safety of our own
I,
trade and
I,
all.
I absolutely. There have been questions raised about whether it was our responsibility. I'll just ask one more question, Padma, to Admiral on this. That
Yeah.
because the ship was here as our guest, the Iran official statement actually underscores that point, that the ship was in international waters, but it was in that area because it was there as a guest of India. I know technically our responsibility ends once the ship leaves our waters. There are some people who are asking, why did the ship sail in this time of war? Others are saying that it couldn't have docked in India indefinitely. How do you see this question?
They had an exercise off Vizag, that Milan exercise. And I think
Yeah.
it was 24th, 25th, and then they left. When they left, they knew that the war has been declared between US and Iran. And yet he decided to go. I don't know if he asked for entering harbor in Sri Lanka or not, but he certainly had already gone round. He was rounding Sri Lanka. That is when, if I were him, I would have immediately got into the harbor. If
Yeah,
I
it's
know that this is war situation, I don't have weapon systems or I don't have ability to find them, I'll stay. I'll tell my people that, look, I'm entering here because, it can open out anytime. But nobody would have known that, it will extend up to South Asia, because it was limited till then. So obviously the US Navy had been planning that, 3 ships have gone. There are 70 country ships which are in IFR, and we'll
yeah.
take a shot when they're coming back. Also, if one thing we should all remember, that nuclear submarines of the US are always on patrol in all 5 continents. It's not that it's only peacetime they don't. Their deployments are 5 months, 6 months. One in the Pacific, one in Indian Ocean. So many times we have met them. This is their normal routine patrol, right? It is not that they came for specifically. We know it. We know it by and large. Once we are at sea, we have fair amount of idea that they are in the sea. That's all. So
Okay.
that's the point.
I
Saying that
think you. Sorry.
to the
Complete your
Navy,
sentence. I want to go to Padma. Yeah. Yeah.
to the Navy, it is not a surprise that submarine is there, but it is operating so close, and yet they haven't told us that in this area they will be operating. That's the point.
Right. I want to just get in, Padma, now. I think Admiral Sinha has explained from a naval perspective very lucidly, very plainly, that the least that was expected from the Americans was a certain amount of information sharing, not operational details, but a certain amount of broad information sharing. It also helps India protect your own ships and subs, right? You don't want to be pulled into some sort of inadvertent conflagration. Look what happened with Kuwait and the jets they shot down. I mean, these are the things that happen if you don't share information in a lucid way. I feel that there is no coincidence in war. Vikram Misri's decision to sign that condolence book, Prime Minister Modi's statement, and the sinking of this ship, these seem to me to be 3 connected developments. I don't know if you see it like that.
Good evening, Barkha. Thank you for having me on your show. Absolutely, I agree with you. I can neither speak from the strategic perspective nor from the diplomatic perspective, as the 2 gentlemen have, Yash and Admiral Sinha. But like you, I can only speak from the point of view of an analyst, a journalist who's been in war situations and reported out of war zones for 30 years plus. Now, I think one thing I'd like to start with, Barkha, please bear with me. The ability to take unilateral action by the United States across the Indian Ocean is precisely the reason why. You remember President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer fell out over Diego Garcia, the United States' most important military base, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, which is just 1,700 kilometers south of India's southern tip. So from there, the US has watched, acted against the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and the Taliban, Iraq, Al Qaeda, ISIS, and now Iran. So now, of course, in the interim, under pressure, they've been allowed to operate out of Diego Garcia again, and the larger discussion has been put off. But the point is, the US has already been operating in and across the Indian Ocean specifically since 1966, that is for 60 years. So the torpedoing of the Iranian ship some days ago does not come to me as a surprise. As you said, your remark on war just now, I don't think there's a lot of coincidence there. And okay, yes, the attack came barely 2 weeks after the commander of the US Pacific Fleet, which is the world's largest naval fleet, visited Sri Lanka and spoke of deepened military cooperation and marine security, etc. And yes, the US was also invited to the Vizag exercises, but it didn't attend, right? So now I don't mean to take away from the gravity of this attack, but as Admiral Sinha spoke, I was wondering, surely there must have been some thinking on the calculated risk involved, etc., even on Iran's part, before sending the ship to the exercise. Because after all, US threats to attack Iran didn't come overnight. We've been hearing of them since months, dare I say years. So also, and the other thing is, how else would a ship returning from Vizag to Iran sail? It would have to sail through the southern or past the southern coast of Sri Lanka. Now, while one can discuss the morality, the ethics, the seeming indifference of India's reaction to Sri Lanka's reaction, etc., I don't think there can be any charges of violation of sovereignty, more so because this took place, as we've all said,
No,
in international waters.
I think that is
and
not
more
the
than-
charge.
And
I
more
think
than
Sorry, go ahead.
and more than 50 nautical miles away from India, which is, as you were pointing out, not strictly India's area of jurisdiction. But of course, an expression of regret from the Indian Navy or Indian authorities would have been welcome a little earlier, more so because, after all, India has not stopped calling Iran a friendly nation just because our Prime Minister visited Israel ahead of the attacks. And I think that has just come now with the Prime Minister's remarks on avoiding conflict, and also with the Foreign Secretary's, visit to the embassy to write in the condolence book. But I don't subscribe, I don't mean any of you in this discussion, but there are plenty of people in the social media beating their breasts about how India has been humiliated intentionally by the United States. I can understand the strategic concerns and the operational concerns expressed by Admiral Sinha, but I don't, it doesn't make sense to view this as humiliation. As you said, there are no coincidences in war. Barkha?
Let me take that to Ambassador Sinha. Ambassador Sinha, I don't think there's any point getting agitated and looking at things through the prism of domestic politics. That's why I try to have these conversations without any politicians on them, so that we can actually look at the issues without the rhetoric. Obviously, the opposition is gunning for the government right now. They are talking in terms of this humiliation. I'm saying, do you agree with Padma that this is not about humiliation? Of course, Padma, there's no question of sovereignty being violated. The ship was not in Indian waters, right? I think my question, and it's just a layperson's questions to you, Ambassador Sinha, is that would you be concerned if you were in government today? What would you be thinking? If you were serving in government today and this happened, what would you be thinking, given we've just been through this rocky, mad journey with the Americans over tariffs, right? We've got 38 flagged Indian vessels stuck in the Persian Gulf. We've got, some say, 23,000 seafarers from India whose lives may be at risk. We've got a potential LNG issue as Qatar halts LNG production. There are 9 million, 10 million Indians in the Gulf. There are so many things to weigh when you're in government. I grant the government that. So with that hat, Ambassador Sinha, how do you respond to what you've heard?
I would certainly be very concerned. And I'd be concerned not only because of the factors that you mentioned, which are extremely important, but also because, I recall when in September 2014, a Chinese submarine, a diesel-class submarine, visited Colombo. I was High Commissioner. I think it docked the day the Japanese Prime Minister, then Shinzo Abe, arrived in Colombo. Now, our Navy had tracked that submarine when it would cross the Malacca Straits. So our Navy was fully aware. Of course, I got aware of it later, but not later, before the submarine docked, but our Navy certainly was tracking it. So it'd be interesting to know whether our Navy, and this is not a question to anybody because we're all people who have retired, at least your panelists, Admiral Sinha and I are retired many years ago, whether our Navy was aware that a US nuclear submarine was lurking around. But that, again, is an academic question. There is no question of humiliation because, the Americans, we are known that they do things, it's my way or the highway. We've seen that happening, and particularly in this administration. What I would like to say is that we shouldn't be either cowed down or be worried in terms of expressing what we feel, because it's high time, that we need to express clearly what our concerns are and tell our American friends, because at one time I remember when they were at Diego Garcia, we were apprehensive, we didn't want outsiders there. And then when we had problems with the Chinese, we said, oh, good, the Americans are there in the Indian Ocean. And now, frankly, we are very much on our own. I mean, the Chinese or Americans, we don't want anyone there, I guess, because, and I'm not saying the Indian Ocean is our ocean, it isn't. But the fact is, it is in an area where we are very strategically located. We are the big power on the Indian Ocean, and we need to be concerned about developments happening in the Indian Ocean. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz and the Arabian Sea are not very far from India. And the impact of the war, we don't know how long this war is going on. I mean, if the end objective was just to kill the supreme leader, then perhaps we would say, okay, the Americans will withdraw. But that obviously is not the end objective. And so are we in for a prolonged war? And if we are, then I think countries in the immediate neighborhood, and especially countries like India that depend on energy supplies, among other things, out of the Gulf, it is of great concern. And I think we should articulate our concerns now quite clearly, whether it's in bilateral meetings.
Publicly or privately?
Well, I mean, certainly privately initially, but publicly also, because if it starts affecting our security, etc. And I'm not saying that this sort of downing of or sinking of a Iranian ship directly affects our security. It doesn't. But as I said, the theater of war seems to have expanded, and that is a matter of concern. And I think we should have no qualms in expressing our concern in this regard. And I think the Prime Minister has been very measured. He said diplomacy, peace, etc. But at some point, we may have to look at going even further, depending on how this war develops and how it affects our people and our security concerns.
Absolutely. A couple more questions later in the program on that. But Admiral Sinha, to Ambassador Sinha's point, were we aware that there's a nuclear sub lurking around? You said, look, the Navy would be aware of presence, not necessarily of area of operation or plans to operate so close. How do you see it? You've said you find it disturbing. Not humiliating, but disturbing. And Padma, I think none of us are saying it's humiliating. So we're on the same page on that. But disturbing is different from humiliating. And I think there's this sense of living in this age of Trump, where Trump just thinks, America can do what it wants to, and we all, as countries, have to toe the line. And I think that's what's creating a disquiet. Loss of life is obviously a given in a war, tragic as it is on any side. So your response to Ambassador Yash's question, were we aware that a nuclear sub was lurking around?
Well, Barkha, we have always known that at least one US nuclear submarine will be in the Indian Ocean. Now, Indian Ocean is huge. It is if you draw a sort of diameter of 3,000 kilometers and then draw a circle, we are looking at that much. So it's a very big area. It can be operating anywhere, but for a nuclear submarine, because it can go quite fast, it can reach an area very quickly because of the nuclear power, and it can do 25, 30 knots underwater. So we would know that they're operating. That is why whenever we have exercise, we inform all partners that we will be doing exercise in so and so area, so that they can tell their nuclear. Number of times we have picked up the submarine in our normal exercise. We do anti-submarine exercises very, extensively. There are occasions when we have picked up and we don't know it was not our submarine. So whose submarine was it? So we know that generally an American submarine will be in Indian Ocean, and not necessarily where what we expect it was where it was, because that's pretty close to the coastline. We normally
Yeah.
don't, submarines don't operate, they operate slightly in the open sea. So I totally agree with Yash that, yes, we absolutely will largely, by and large, we know that there will be at least one nuclear submarine, but not really in
Yeah.
this case. It's very close, and that should have been spoken
And
to us.
the US took part in these exercises without their ships, or they had presence or representation, from what one understands,
Yeah,
Admiral Sinha,
yeah.
right? So we don't know at what stage did they plan this earlier. Did they plan this in response to Iran targeting the Gulf countries? I don't know. But Peter Hexet's statement, Padma, it sounded pretty much like, we can do what you want to. We'll come for you wherever you are. There are no necessary rules of law anymore. um, Admiral Arun Prakash was saying to me that even if you down a ship, the norms of warfare are you then offer assistance, especially if the ship is unarmed. Admiral Sinha, just before I come to Padma, is that correct? Would you agree with that? That even if it had downed the ship, it should have offered assistance? Admiral Sinha?
Oh yes, it is. It is by the law, the SOLAS and the IMO regulation says even the ship which has hit, the ship
Yeah.
which is hitting the other one, and he sees their destruction, the ship is also required to offer assistance to pick up the survivors.
Exactly. So my
Yes.
point is, Padma, what the Americans are really saying is, we don't believe. They did this with the tariffs. We don't believe in the way the world is conducting trade. Now they're saying, you know what? We don't agree with the way, we don't agree with these norms of war. We don't agree. We're just going to do what we want to. And I think, I don't know about the hand wringing in by anybody else. I think my hand wringing is like a hegemonic muscle flexing is what we're seeing very close to our our backyard, so to speak. But go ahead with your thoughts.
Okay. First of all, at the outset, I just want to clarify. You repeated sovereignty and humiliating. I just must make clear that I was not referring to what we think. I was
No,
referring
I
specifically.
know.
I was referring specifically to some very well-regarded analysts on the social media, and I was completely astounded because they tend to speak of sovereignty and of India being humiliated as though, as Yash was pointing out, the entire Indian Ocean, we hold some sort of sway over it simply because it bears our name. Now, I just wanted to, yeah, you're right about Hexet and his comments, but then as he spoke, it reminded me of Condoleezza Rice saying we will smoke them out of their holes, etc. When the war against terror
Correct.
began.
Yeah.
I think that is largely war rhetoric. And let's not also forget, what Admiral Sinha was saying about the norms of war, the routine norms of war is, yes, you come to the rescue of, the sailors, even if you have torpedoed them or whatever, those norms. I don't think the Americans are really looking at Iran as an equal. They've been talking about terrorism, a terror state, and they are going about this entire war almost as if it were a war on terror, to take out the leadership, as they say. I think this is a very interesting second angle to this attack, Barkha, if I may. There is also this erroneous impression. I mean, the second Iranian ship, which is now in Sri Lanka's economic zone, the Sri Lankan government has just said in parliament that it is going to safeguard the crew on board that ship. Now, this is very peculiar because that is going to, put it in a very awkward situation in many ways. There is an erroneous impression that Sri Lanka will do so under the pressure from China, to which it owes more than $7 billion, because China and Iran are very close allies, and China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil. But we have to note that China itself has stayed well out of this war so far, other than to pay lip service and to issue statements of condemnation. And in that aspect, I find China and India are somewhat similar. They have allies, like the United States, but those alliances that China has and that we have don't always necessarily extend to military intervention or military help, at least not overtly as far as China is concerned. And then the safeguarding the crew, which Sri Lanka is now talking about, may or may not have implications for Sri Lanka-US relations also. If you see how President Trump reacted to Spain's refusal to approve this war, let alone join it, that is a lesson in itself. And I also think that Sri Lanka, to my mind, should, is fully slowly to emerge from its economic crisis, it should keep a low profile and restrict its aid, if any, to the barest humanitarian level, and not neither go beyond that nor publicize or browbeat this too much. And the last question: will Sri Lankan aid to the Iranians provoke India? After all, as Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Israel is being read, very widely as a sign of support for the war, I doubt that very much. I don't think India is going to feel provoked, because if India feels provoked, it will keep that as much under wraps as it has up to now and not react, as it has kept its exact position and stand on the US-Israel war also under wraps. And I would say in times of war, perhaps that's the wise thing to do. Barkha.
Okay, I need to take quick last comments. I'll actually start with you, Padma, and we'll go in reverse order. Vikram Misri, the Foreign Secretary, signing that condolence book. We need to talk a little bit about that, because there was also a lot of commentary on the fact that when Khamenei was killed, again in India, there was fierce debate. Should India condemn? Should India not condemn? Should India condole? Should India not? India has condoled, signed this book, met with the Iranian ambassador today. How do you read this moment?
Look, we have a very large Shia population. We must also, pay some kind of, give them some kind of a sign. As I said before, we have not exactly, it's not as if we have, suddenly denounced Iran as anemic to the Indian Republic and that kind of thing. Iran is still a friendly country, officially, no matter what it may look like. So I think this was much needed, and it had to come. Now, I think why it is also important is because I don't see the real dangers of a spillover of this war to India is coming from the watery south, that is the central Indian Ocean. I see them coming from our usual suspects, northwest and north of India, that is from Pakistan, because Pakistan is currently facing 3 conflicts, Barkha, on 3 fronts, and about 40 million people in Pakistan are Shia. That's about 20%. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a backlash in Pakistan, which 39, 40 people were killed. But Pakistan has also curried favor with the United States. It's joined the Board of Peace for Gaza. It will do whatever it's told to do by the United States. So that's why I feel its goose is cooked. And the conflicts, there's the Afghan Taliban conflict. I mean, even the Panshiris are now saying that they back the Taliban against Pakistan. Then you have the Pakistan-Baluchistan conflict, okay? And now we're hearing that the United States is likely to back the Kurds on Iran's western borders to Syria and Iraq, and also the Baluchis. And finally, the defense pact that Pakistan has with Saudi Arabia. I mean, its foreign ministers just warned Iran not to target Saudi Arabia, and claimed that Pakistan has sought assurances from Saudi also that its soil won't be used for attacks against Iran. But this seems very unlikely, because Saudi Arabia is saying that it has its full right to respond to Iran. So if Pakistan starts deploying its air force against Iran under pressure from Saudi Arabia and under pressure from Trump, the goose is cooked. There have been a lot of violent demonstrations in Pakistan already. Might spill over. Yeah.
I just wanted to say in response to your first part that I think that condolence book signing, and Ambassador Sinha can come in later on this, could not have been only propelled by our Shia population. I think religious denomination is quite besides the point. There is a historic relationship with Iran. Sure. We are not going to put that aside, irrespective of religious communities. But before I give Yash the last word, Admiral Sinha, just if you were serving in the Navy today, what would be your biggest concern right now? Can we unmute Admiral Sinha? Yeah.
Yeah, it's unmute. Yeah.
Yeah.
My biggest concern, apart from the operation of the Americans so close to our coastline, the Americans have told their embassy staff in Pakistan to vacate. They are moving out. Now, this is one indication that it is quite possible that either the Americans will operate from there, or they're expecting Iranians to hit the Pakistanis. So this is a big concern as a military man I would have, and therefore preparation to that effect, it should be there. Now look at what statement they have made. Pakistan, he says we condemn Iranian attack on Saudi, but we also condemn the Israeli attack on Iran. So we can play this politics for some time, but after that, after some time, people will realize even the Americans were throw them after they have used him. And Iranians, of course, they have bought a permanent enemy now from now onwards. So I would think that we should be very concerned about what is likely to happen next.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And let me give the last word to Ambassador Sinha. You said already that Trump has started a war that he doesn't know how to end. Nobody knows what the possible off-ramp could be, though there are some reports in the New York Times today that Iran is reaching out, it's willing to talk if the Americans are, and so on. Parallel to that is reporting that the Kurds are being armed by the CIA to basically do the work of American troops because America doesn't want to put troops on the ground. Trump doesn't seem to be in any mood to end this anytime soon, despite the backlash from within his own base. So let me give you the last word here. Admiral Sinha says we've got to gear up for what's coming next. What do you think is coming next?
I think I quite agree with Admiral Sinha. We really have to gear up. But, what's coming next is something that I wish I knew. I mean, I don't, frankly. But what I do know is that the theater of war is being expanded and there is no end game at sight. You mentioned the Kurds. The Kurds cannot take on the Iranian armed forces, whether it's the IRGC or the Basij militia or the regular army. So they're going to, even when they're armed, and it's going to be a very long drawn affair in any case. It's not just the Kurds, they will need help from special ops, etc. And that again is a quagmire which the US doesn't want to get into. They have enough experience in Iraq and Afghanistan and much before that in Vietnam. So I think for us it is a matter of grave concern. What Pakistan does or does not do, frankly, Pakistan runs with their hair and hunts with the hound. It's done it all its existence. We all know that. But as far as India is concerned, we have to hedge our bets very carefully. And even the visit of PM to Israel, people are saying that we have taken sides in the conflict. I don't think so. For us, Israel is a very important partner, and the visit signaled the importance of Israel in terms of our partnership. As far as Iran goes, on the other hand, we have civilizational ties. And I mean, though you may or may not be a great fan of the late Supreme Leader, particularly since his statements on India sometimes were a bit jarring, not a bit jarring, quite a bit jarring. Mm-hmm. But be that as it may, we have very old relations with Iran. So obviously that is why the Prime Minister is talking about peace, dialogue, diplomacy, etc.
What did you make of Vikram Misri being at the condolence signing?
I think it's a very good gesture. I wouldn't call it an extraordinary gesture, certainly a good gesture, particularly since the government is being criticized for not issuing a statement. Your highest ranking diplomat goes to the embassy in a very dignified manner, signs the condolence book, and a message goes across. Beyond that, perhaps we don't need to do more. But I think it's also to assuage some of the ruffled feathers here about statements not being issued, etc. But I think what was done was diplomatically correct, and that's how it should be, I think.
All right, we leave it there. As they say, buckle up and brace yourself. The next few days are going to be bumpy, and that's putting it mildly. There is no aspect of this war, if it doesn't end soon, that is going to leave the global economy untouched. And just by that definition, it's going to hit us here in India. And I'm talking about economic consequences. The security ramifications are also enormous. Right now, Russia and China have sat this out. There is some reporting that China wants to mediate, but, let's see what happens with that. The Kurds, Ambassador Sinha says, can't take on the Iranian armed forces. America won't put boots on the ground. So is this going to be, hellfire from the skies for several weeks in different parts of the world? We just don't know right now. But thank you very much to our panel, to Admiral Sinha, Ambassador Yash Sinha, and to Padma Rao. Always a pleasure. To our audience, thank you. Our continued coverage on this war that I am no longer prepared to call the Israel-Iran war. It has expanded enormously, pulling other countries into it, continues non-stop. So do keep watching, and see you all soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.